I think on quite a personal level, why I sort of make work or want to make work is probably a way for me to personally understand the world that I live in, and then I guess or hope that that could expand to other people and to kind of a wider audience and some kind of a being in the world, not necessarily just a straight communication, but just as a way to be able to to be able to I think it's quite a generous thing to be able to make work, to be able to, I guess that's also why I'm quite interested in dealing with different sorts of spaces, and there are a number of different kind of ongoing concerns in my work, but I don't really like to pin exactly, those down that I have to stick to them, but I think there's sort of questions that come up from those specific sorts of things. Sometimes those relate quite particularly to a particular space that I might be working in. Other times they relate to aspects of pattern in its widest kind of sense. So at the moment that's looking quite a lot at sort of social and economic structures of pattern, and in earlier works, like the Paisley works, it might have been looking at a history of a decorative pattern, or in some of the data stream works looking at patterns of data and computer type codes. And another thing that I think I come back to in terms of questioning quite a lot is how colour operates. So whether that's a sort of a physical expression or understanding of that, or whether it's quite conceptual. For me, it sort of oscillates very much between those two, and probably that's how I like to think of how my work can often be experienced, is that there's many sort of layers to it. And so like for the cafe work, for example, I'm sure some people will just come into the space and it will be so different, and there's obviously a lot of colour in the space, so there's quite a experience of that space in a different way, and so that's a valid response. But if you want to sort of spend more time in that or sort of look into some of the other layerings, they're not, there are a lot of other things that exist within that work in terms of the research that I've done, or why the pie charts are certain pie charts and those sorts of things. And I think for my own, what drives my practice is that kind of investigating and wanting to know more about things, and then that comes out in a visual way. So the work that I've created for the cafe is called The Golden Grain, and when Rana invited me to do the project, it was very exciting for me and slightly daunting as well. I've never worked in a cafe space before, but it was particularly intriguing for me because of the way that the cafe is a social space, and I really wanted to engage with that kind of location in the work, and also some of the materiality of the work relates to things that are used in a cafe, but in quite a different sort of way. So instead of just doing a wall or a floor or something, I decided it was really important to incorporate a lot of different elements, that it became a work that was very, very immersive. So it wasn't, a wall in a cafe, but it was the whole cafe became the artwork. And so there are quite a number of different components in the work. We start off with the floor, which is a large pie chart. It's painted onto the inside part of the floor, and then it carries on around with the artificial grass that goes out into the courtyard. And then there's the ceiling, where there's 36 pie chart paintings that relate to specific statistics to do with wheat. And there's also a lot of sort of overlapping yellow and gold decals of vinyl decals of wheat on the ceiling itself. If we move down to the tables, there's a triangular motif that's sort of like sections of the pie charts on each of the individual tables. And if you move outside, there's two umbrellas, one depicting the largest exporting countries of wheat in the world, and the other depicting the largest importing wheat countries in the world. There is also on the outside the windows of where the offices are and the workshops. There's sort of large bar graphs that go up or down in that particular area, and also on the glass door. Another two components that are particularly important is the plate that I designed and had made, a ceramic plate, which is an 11-inch dinner plate, which depicts the largest wheat-growing countries. And that was a really important pivotal point for me for the work, in terms of that it was something that wasn't attached to a surface, but something that had a kind of continual motion through the cafe, and that it was actually something that people touched and ate from, and so there was a different kind of experience with that. I think I really wanted to try to incorporate a range of senses. Obviously you're in a cafe, so you have smell and taste somehow already incorporated into that. So I wanted to sort of pull out some of those things. The other quite pivotal thing was the menu index. And so I was thinking about, you know, how when you are in a cafe, you're, you know, reading through a kind of a listing basically of the foods. And so I wanted to incorporate a listing of aspects that had influenced the work. So basically there are sort of quite a statistical kind of index of all the pie charts and bar graphs and those sorts of numbers, and so that I was interested in the way that people would read the menu, but then also perhaps not read the work, not so literally as that, but would have other kind of levels of information if they wanted to kind of think about other aspects that I'd put into the work. So for me, it's really important that all of those different elements come together to make the work. I was aware that I didn't want to sort of decorate, or not that decorate's bad, but didn't want to sort of make a work that was seen as just like a cafe refit, but that it was an artwork, and so that it worked in a number of different ways within that space, and that I liked the idea that people were coming into that space and spending probably a longer time than they do looking at a work in a gallery because they've come to meet a friend or have a coffee or something like that, and that perhaps some of those things would start to come into play for them the longer they spent in this space. So for the last couple of years, I've been investigating structures of economics quite a bit, and I think that started when I was doing a residency in New York for 6 months in the middle of 2007, when a lot of the sort of talk of the whole economic kind of crash and foreclosures and all the sort of things that trickled down to everywhere else started to happen. I think also being in that particular city and you know, operating between someone asking you for a quarter and then getting out on Wall Street, or then reading the newspaper about how many billions are made or lost, all those sorts of things started to really impact my thinking about how these structures of society and structures of money operate across a city like New York. And I guess those ideas have broadened over the last couple of years into sort of a range of things, but have particularly sort of analysed using different sorts of representations of data, whether they're sort of charts or flow charts or different sorts of things. And for this particular project, when I came to do the site visit, I spent some time in the library here, looking specifically, well actually I didn't know what I was looking specifically for, but I came across a thesis that Robin Oliver had written about wheat and flour production in the Taranaki district. And it just set me off into thinking a lot about sort of food production. And another quite pivotal point was going to Egypt shortly after that and spending a month there and seeing paintings in a nobleman's tomb called Mena, which depicted wheat growing in Egypt. And it was intriguing to me to think that a country like Egypt, where it was the beginning of cultivation of wheat, now is the largest importer of wheat in the world, and thinking about, you know, from a personal level, you know, where food comes from, that kind of much wider global sourcing of food in relation to 1840s Taranaki, where there was 17 flour mills just for the local production. So I guess it started with those sorts of things, and then it branched out further into looking more at the sort of political aspects of, well, specifically wheat production. And so you'll see within the work itself a number of, for the cushions, for example, the largest 4 seed companies in the world. And on the outside of the wall, also the same seed companies, but also where wheat is traded, particularly in America. And I was interested in how that sort of, you know, food is necessary, but how it's also become such a commodity, and so how that affects the price, world price. And so all those sort of statistics, which sound quite dry, import, export, all those sorts of things, feed into sort of a more human kind of level of how that kind of trickles down and affects countries like Egypt and other places. So it was trying to bring quite a range of these things together for me.